people are saying if Bitcoin is going to go back to like 85K, I think if that happens, it's actually a good thing for us. Like this is like maybe your last opportunity to get, your last opportunity to get at this price, right? So it's like. So I'm Jason Fang. I'm the founder of Sora Ventures. I started basically investing on a full-time basis in the Web3 space in 2015. And I was one of the early employees at Fenbushi Capital. And I was basically involved with the US market. And this is before the ICO era. So this was at blockchain equity as a form of investment. And then fast forward to ICO, kind of that 2017, 2018 craze. That's when I started Sora Ventures. We first invested in opted infrastructure. And then fast forward to the last couple of years, we've been investing mostly into Bitcoin ecosystem, primarily on the UTXO base layer. And then in the Ethereum layer, we've been relatively active on the D side, decentralized science. And then recently, I think we're probably more famous for launching kind of the first Asian micro strategy, where we partner with a listed company in the Tokyo Stock Exchange called Metaplannit. And then we brought in a lot of the Bitcoin investors, basically built the round together, and then been helping them with a lot of the marketing and post-listing, and that's been doing really well for us. That's a great question. So I think in general, we're I'll take a step back. Like most of the venture funds in this market, quote unquote, they're more like hybrid funds. So whereas I think everyone is quote unquote called investment fund, from our perspective, what we are as a company is really investing into early stage companies within an early stage narrative. That's quite different from a lot of our competitors, a lot of the products in the market, because I think most companies, especially most investment funds in the market, are always investing in what is hot today versus like what is hot maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And so you asked me, how do I evaluate the market and how do I reduce risk? The first thing is I don't invest in things that are hot today. That are hot today is usually means that there's some form of bubble, right? Or there's a near bubble that's coming up. So your risk is going to be a lot higher compared to something that is a lot less riskier. Now, I'm not suggesting to invest in things that are not hot. I think it's more important to be investing in the future of Web3 than looking at things that have been maybe hot 2-3 years ago, but no longer hot today. So I'll give you an example. So last year, we started looking into Bitcoin. Bitcoin as an ecosystem, there was innovation where you could launch fungible and non-fungible tokens, and from kind of the Ordinals innovation, right? And I think the paper came out around February last year. We started investing in March. And that was when no one invested in UTXO, no one invested in Bitcoin. And that only really picked up, I think, end of last year. People started to look at, UTXO as a base layer. People start looking and then eventually got into Bitcoin L2s. So it's like, but then we started looking at it in like March when no one's looking at it, right? And then of course, Ethereum recently had a new narrative called this, CZ, the CEO of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, they're all vouching for this new category. But realistically, no one was actually bullish on this category. I mean, we did a conference in Taiwan last December where the focus was purely on Bitcoin ecosystem and DeSci, but no one felt like DeSci was going to be the future play. And then I think only 2 months ago, people start reaching out to me and be like, Jason, I think, that you made such a great bet on DeSci. I mean, DeSci is picking up now. And honestly, it's like investment in this. Most people in our industry are always investing because things are currently hot. But I think for us, we're always looking at something in the future. I think based on this interview, you'll probably learn more about, what we're doing beyond Web3, with Metaplannit and all the stuff that we're launching in Asia. But the idea here is we're always looking at the future. We're always looking at things that, in our opinion, that is not hot today, but potentially will be hot next year or 2 years from now. So this year has been incredible for us, as if you guys are big on Bitcoin. Obviously, we've been big on the Bitcoin ecosystem since last year. I think we are still one of the purest the most active, bullish, the one that has the most portfolio companies in Asia in terms of like UTXO-based startups. So we have like well over 30 companies in the Bitcoin ecosystem, not including the ones from Bitcoin's layer twos. But the idea here is we want to explore an opportunity where we could really bridge Bitcoin beyond what is being invested. Like, we're investors in wallets, right? But wallets, they struggle with onboarding users all the time. And so this fund is really to dedicate towards investing into listed companies that are modeling the MicroStrategy in the US. And the idea of that is that if you're able to open up a sub-product of Bitcoin to a local market that is regulated, through the stock exchange, then effectively you're basically opening up the opportunity for retails to buy Bitcoin indirectly. Our fund is probably one of the first fund in the world to announce something like this. Very, very new, but I do believe that it's going to be more than enough to deploy towards maybe 10 listed companies next year. So our goal next year, like in 2025, is to have 10 listed companies around the world. Each listed company will deploy anywhere from 5 million to 10 million USD. Some depending on which market. If the market is larger, then we can deploy up to 20 million USD. But all this money will go towards fueling the MicroStrategy of the world, so that people in those local markets will have access to buying Bitcoin without going through like a Bitcoin wallet or a crypto exchange that has all these KYC, AML. Now it's a lot easier for Americans, US residents to onboard on these exchanges. But if you're in Asia, it's a lot more difficult because the regulation here is a lot more gray. It's always changing. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so even though Bitcoin has been around for 10 plus years, the truth is majority of people don't know how to manage Bitcoin, or they don't have a Bitcoin wallet, right? But everyone has a bank account. With the right people, yes. So I think a lot of people assume that MicroStrategy can be copy and paste across many jurisdictions. It's true to some extent. Actually, this is probably the first interview that I've done after like launching MetaPlanet. So I feel like I am sharing a lot of knowledge to a lot of people who are interested in this strategy. But realistically, I think people need to understand that, MetaPlanet's success is not just simply buying Bitcoin. Because if you look at the history of how listed company adopted Web3 strategies, including MetaPlanet, if you look at the history of MetaPlanet, they actually started out as a company looking to do metaverse. And then that didn't work out. And MetaPlanet is hands down not the only company in Asia. There were companies in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange that did similar things like MetaPlanet, where they tried to launch something with metaverse, and I think that was 2022 when NFT metaverse was like the hottest thing, and that ultimately failed, right? So I wanted to tell people which is like, just because you have a listed company doesn't mean that you can immediately integrate a Web3 concept and it will be successful. It's actually really, really hard. And the same thing here with MicroStrategy. It's not simply just buying Bitcoin and you'll be successful. A lot of big companies in the world that had bought Bitcoin were actually not successful, right? And it's not successful in the sense that to the same level as MetaPlanet, right? So I think a lot of people, to my knowledge, there's over 100 companies that are copying the MicroStrategy model this year, but most of them will fail. I think most of them will experience some form of a pump and then dump, but then it'll be very, very different from what we've seen with MetaPlanet, where it's been able to scale. And part of that is because it's really not just about buying Bitcoin and that's it and just stopping there, right? It's like we've changed a big part of the board in MetaPlanet. We've brought in a lot of true Bitcoiners, investors who's been in this space, who have put in money, time, energy into building this ecosystem for many, many times. Like I said, we did a Sora summit in Taipei, which is, at that time, that was before Bitcoin Asia, which is the largest conference for Bitcoins in Asia. So we did one in last year in December, and Casey, who is the founder of Ordinals Protocol, he came over to speak and talk about runes. But the idea is, you're always very, very forward thinking. You want to be working with people who believe in this model so that you're not getting wrecked, right? A lot of people just buy Bitcoin, or a lot of quote unquote shell holders or listed companies holders, they just assume that these guys will buy Bitcoin, pump and then dump, right? And that has always been the model in the past. So like realistically, this is the first time where like true Bitcoiners or people who really believe in the future of Bitcoin coming in to start something new. And I think it's more important to emphasize on the people who are running it than the action of buying Bitcoin. I mean, both are important, but hands out, I think it's a lot hard to mimic the one with the team. So I want to emphasize that even though Metaplanet is quote unquote, mimicking MicroStrategy, as a product, it's actually quite different from MicroStrategy. I'll give you an example. I think MicroStrategy is like the base layer for all the things that's happening around Metaplanet. But Metaplanet is doing way more than MicroStrategy. Part of it is because it's being in Japan. Now, every company can adopt a new strategy based on that jurisdiction, unique to that jurisdiction. For example, Japan is unique in the sense that if you're a Japanese and you're buying Bitcoin, you can be taxed up to 55% on your Bitcoin, unrealized gain tax. So this is like, you go from Bitcoin goes 1,000 to 2,000, you're not even selling it, you're taxed up to 55%, right? So it's like a really not amazing period to be buying Bitcoin if you're Japanese, right? But if you're buying Metaplanet shares, you only have to pay up to 20% of realized gain tax, right? So it's like a lot safer, right? And then there's other perks, like if the Japanese stock market is interesting, like, you hold like 1,000 shares, like 100 shares, like you hold X amount of small amount of shares, you get certain perks for being the shareholder. That's like quite unique in the Japanese market. But like basically the idea here is, I think, people can't just assume that, hey, we can copy something and paste it there. You still have to run something that's unique to the model, right? So for example, Sora Ventures, this is not announced yet, but, we just bought a listed company in Hong Kong in the Hong Kong main board. And we're going to have that narrative that's going to be very different from Japan. We're looking at other markets right now, Taiwan, Korea, and that's why I'm flying to Korea a lot. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and other markets in Asia, right? The ones that are significant, I think they can all have a MicroStrategy play, but with a twist that is unique to that market. And of course, I think it's the most important thing is it needs to have the proper team to be running it that knows how to run this long term. I think it's still the development of sub Bitcoin products, right? What I mean by that is Bitcoin as a product is becoming more and more institutionalized, not only from a regulatory perspective, but also from a pricing perspective. Like Bitcoin is becoming more and more expensive, so that the regular person is finding even harder to buy one Bitcoin. And so the development of these separate Bitcoin products like Metaplanet and all the listed companies that we bought in Asia, like those will have a very strong market demand where I think it's going to carry Bitcoin premiums. Like all the MicroStrategy products that we have carry Bitcoin premiums, meaning that they're effectively a discount of the current Bitcoin price. So for example, if you actually bought Metaplanet shares today, you'll basically on the face value own you'll basically be 1/4 the price of as opposed to buying the actual Bitcoin through an ETF or on exchange. And these are what we call Bitcoin premiums, right? It's because on ETF, they're basically a trust structure, which is they're fixed 1-to-1. The corporate structure carries a lot of leverage. Leverage is actually embedded in the corporate structure, not on the retail market side. Oh. So it makes a lot more sense for retailers to be buying a Metaplanet and MicroStrategy rather than like buying Bitcoin on exchange. Because if let's say, for example, I want to leverage on Bitcoin, then I'm going on Binance or Upbit or Bitfund, and I'm doing a 2x long leverage, right? So I'm basically putting myself at risk. I could effectively become liquidated if the price of Bitcoin drops. But if you're buying the listed company, that risk is actually being carried through the corporate structure. So you as a shareholder, you don't have that risk, right? That Bitcoin premium will fluctuate, but it's usually above 2. And that's what makes it very attractive as a product. Whereas you look at something that's similar in the real world, I'm sure Warren Buffett has a company called Berkshire Hathaway. They have 2 types of shares. They have a shares A and a shares B. The shares A is like worth, I think, 600K USD for one share, right? And shares B is more than 1,500 off one of the shares A. So it's like shares B is targeting more towards retail markets, right? And then shares A is more for institutions. I think Bitcoin will be similar, right? Bitcoin will become more and more friendly towards institutions. Like large institutions will buy Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETF. And then retailers in the future will start looking at sub-products of Bitcoin. And these sub-products of Bitcoins are going to be products like Metaplanet or MicroStrategy and the ones we're launching in Hong Kong, Thailand. So that will be very, very interesting. Yeah, so we value a lot on the partners we work with. So similar to the US, a lot of the companies that we end up buying out, like the listed company we end up buying out, we still need to operate the existing business. So usually what happens is we're working with a local partner that is effectively an expert in working with the existing business. So for example, Metaplanet is hotel business. They can't just like give up the hotel business. Even if you're going to give up the hotel business, they need to do it within X amount of years. Like they can't do it immediately because there isn't a category for like, you know, Bitcoin business. There isn't a category for MicroStrategy, right? So it's like they got to keep that business running while running the idea. Same thing in Hong Kong, the one we bought. So there's definitely going to be local partners that we're working with who will understand that, you know, there's opportunity for us to get even higher Bitcoin premium if we're able to properly run the local business, the existing business, while we're, you know, working on this MicroStrategy. So imagine like if the business itself is making a lot of money, we can use that money to buy more Bitcoin. Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm very bullish, but I do foresee one of the reasons why I'm so bullish is, you know, obviously Donald Trump is now in the throne. Again, I think the way to look at this is either you have Donald Trump or Biden, right? It's not like Donald Trump is better than anyone else. It's just the fact that you have these two to choose from. Donald Trump obviously will be the one that will give us much more upside in the next 4 years. So the fact that Trump is on the throne and Biden is already a huge win for us. Now the question whether, you know, a lot of people, the speculation is saying that whether this will become a true thing where the Donald Trump is, you know, working with the team to build this treasury, whether it become a true thing, to me is actually not that important because I know that eventually will come, whether that is in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. Actually, if it comes in 3 years, then that means I have 3 years to prepare for this, right? So regardless, I think it will come if it's not going to be this year or next year. But the point here is, assuming the US will do this, and I think they will eventually, I think it's just a matter of time, just like, you know, the ETF. I think eventually when they do that, then other countries will follow. And you look at history, it's always like that, right? It's like US starts and then, you know, all the other countries in Asia follows, like Japan follows, Singapore follows. And so like, it's going to have bottlenecks initially for sure, right? But the thing is, I think the US has made very clear that they're interested in doing that. They're exploring on that. And I think other countries, even like the UAE, have made plans to want to do something similar, right? And obviously, the more people who are doing it, the more countries are doing it, the better. But like for us, we don't see it as a disadvantage. We don't see it as a bottleneck. We see it as more time for us to prepare for what is going to become even bigger in the future. I agree. So I think if you asked me, you know, just 4 years ago, I would say put, you know, 1% of your asset into Bitcoin. And now if you ask me, I'll still say 5%, you know, very conservatively 5% of your total asset into Bitcoin, right? So I think the whole point here is there are going to be people who are still skeptical about Bitcoin, but that's why there's growth. There's room to grow, right? If this conversation now between us is that, hey, I think, you know, everyone is no longer skeptical about Bitcoin. Everyone is no longer, you know, have to either Bitcoin will be, you know, like a replacement or maybe a fad, right? It could be a fad, right? Then I think that's the time where I think the market is very, very bullish into the peak. Then I would actually recommend maybe, you know, exploring other things. But at this point, because we're so early in the space, like I said, right? I mean, I think the total amount of people who still owns like Bitcoin today is probably like less than 3% around the world, or maybe like even less than 1%, right? I think, but less than 3%, I'm sure we can both agree, right? So I think the point here is we have so much room to grow in this industry, whether that's Bitcoin or other forms of digital asset. I think the point here is we are so early, and the fact that there are still people who are skeptical about this asset just means that we have a lot more room to grow. And for us, this is an opportunity, right? So we don't look at things just because people, again, I think talking to me versus like a bunch of other fund managers, you might find that I'm relatively optimistic. But in this industry, you have to be optimistic. Just like when we're investing in things that are not hot, like DeSci or like Ordinals or UTXO base layer, it's like, just because it's not hot today doesn't mean it's not going to be hot tomorrow. You're investing, we're in the venture business. A venture business usually lasts 4 or 5 years. You're locked up for 4 or 5 years for investors. Then you need to be investing in fund managers who are visionaries, who can see things that others can't, right? Who can tell you stories that others can't see, who can depict, the image and the price point of assets that other people can't show. So it's like, these are things that are fundamentally different talking to a crypto fund manager versus maybe a Web2 fund manager or a regulator. So I think Korea is still one of the most important markets in our space. In traditional market-wise, I'm told that the Korean equity market has declined significantly and that a lot of people are looking more towards markets that has more liquidity, like the US, for example, or Japan. I mean, in my opinion, that's just music to my ears. I think that is just an opportunity for us to be investing the right time. That is, we don't want to be investing in a market or in a time where, the equities market is pumping, right? We want to be investing in a time when we know for a fact that this will be a really important market in the future. We know that it's not going to zero. We know that this is just a correction. And so actually this is why we're so active about, doing something similar like Metaplanet, but in the Korean market. I also think the success of Metaplanet is also driven by the fact that, the people who are running it are foreigners. Like the CEO of Metaplanet is not Japanese, right? The investors are predominantly Sora Ventures is not Japanese. I mean, our name is Japanese, but the people who are running it are not Japanese. Like Bitcoin Magazine, these guys are not Japanese, right? So it's like this entirely new team and new blood and new narrative of like foreigners for a lot of Japanese. It's like quite comforting because whatever the retailers explored or experienced in the past, where there's pump and dumps and there's all these plays being wrecked. Like we're a different group of people. We're like the believers, right? We're the first mover believers market, and we're gonna be running this and see how it goes, right? It may not be successful, but at least like our mission, our vision is embedded in our DNA. So we met with some of the families as well to learn more about the Korean market. We met up with FAs, brokers as well. And, that's just why I'm making, several trips to Korea in the last 2 months. But, ultimately, I think we are very bullish in the Korean market. And we're also very open to meeting people who are interested in this strategy. So, every time I'm making this trip, I'm meeting more people. And I'm willing to share my idea too, right? It's, a lot of people assume that we're coming here to to make money. But no, we're really here to open up the opportunity for Bitcoin. Right? I mean, most of the people in our firm has made money. A lot of these people who's been holding Bitcoin have made money. It's more about the fact that we're creating a product that we believe will expand Bitcoin, right? Like we're basically opening up Bitcoin to the economy, right? That's something that I think even wallets and exchanges struggle with because of KYC and AML. But, if we're able to kind of mimic what we've done in Metaplanet to the Korean market, I think we'll be like the brightest candle in the cave, right? The synergy is that we're combining crypto, Web3, Bitcoin experience into this TradFi environment, where that everything in the TradFi environment has been relatively dark. People are not bullish about it, but we're bullish about our Bitcoin. We're bullish about the future of Web3, right? And so we're bringing a bit of that light into that market, and hopefully people will join us. So I do think a lot of stuff that's happening, it's really, we're changing the history, right? We're changing the history of the financial sector for a lot of regulators, and there will be time when there's going to be bottlenecks, but these are things that we're expected to see. These are things that when we get into launching a Metaplanet, we expect these bottlenecks. I'll give you an example. So when we did Metaplanet, right, we had all these asset, quote unquote Bitcoin. There's actually just Bitcoin on our balance sheet. but we didn't know where to put it. And so historically, we just put it other assets. And then only about, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, the Japanese regulator agreed that they would open a new category under the statement, the income statement, the balance sheet, showing Bitcoin. So never in the Japanese history have you seen like a statement on the balance sheet that will say Bitcoin. Like this year, the regulators, and they were convinced that, okay, we can add Bitcoin as a unique category in the balance sheet. So like, it takes time, right? It takes time because one of the most important things is that the people who are running Metaplanet are true believers in this strategy. They're not selling Bitcoin. We're buying and buying more, and we're only looking for solutions to buy more, right? So you need to have good intentions, right? Whereas historically, I think people assume this to be more of a pump and dump play. No, that's what I'm saying. It's important to be coming here with a very genuine gesture that, hey, we're looking to do something similar, and hopefully we'll have even better effects in the Korean market. I'm very bullish, right? So the way that I tell people is that once we break 100K, like, sky's the limit. We can vision 250K, 200K easily. Rise like once, if the US do announce some form of treasury execution, then we'll probably see somewhere around like 150K easily. Yeah, and then if the other countries follow, then 200K, 250K. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we hit 250K. I think a lot of people always talk about like, there's a market correction is usually bad. I think any form of market correction is an opportunity to get in. So again, I think we're way more optimistic than a lot of traders out there because, yes, we're not actively trading as much as they are, but at the same time, I think the way to look at this is that, if there's any form of large correction, which we saw a couple of days ago, with the Feds announcing, like they're just slowing on the rates, everything, like people are freaking out. People are saying if Bitcoin's going to go back to like 85K, I think if that happens, it's actually a good thing for us. Like this is like maybe your last opportunity to get, your last opportunity to get this price, right? So it's like, don't see it as like something negative, right? See it as an opportunity that you can cherish. Because, I've been through many cycles in my life, and I've regretted every cycle where I'm like, I wish I only bought more Bitcoin when it was corrected, when it was going down.